Hi everybody, welcome back to the Crime Lab. Today we're going to be talking about Colombian serial killer Daniel Camargo Barbosa. So this guy was actually committing murders around the same time as Pedro Lopez, who is known as the Monster of the Andes. And uh, fun fact, their paths actually crossed later on, but I will get to that later. So a little bit of spoilers. So, like I said, he was a Colombian serial killer and rapist, believed to have raped and murdered 72 girls between Colombia and Ecuador in the 1970s and 80s. So, not too long ago. His mother did, so a little bit about his early life. Again, I couldn't find a ton. His mother died before he turned one, and his father was overbearing and emotionally distant. His father then later married a different woman who had fertility issues, and unfortunately that caused the stepmother to become abusive towards him, mainly focusing on humiliation, where she would actually dress him as a girl and send him to school. And despite her best efforts to humiliate him, apparently I can't speak today, he was a great student, but unfortunately was forced to drop out due to financial struggles with the family. So the early crimes was stuff like burglary and petty theft. So he was first arrested in 1958 for a petty theft in Bogota. I'm not 100% sure. He had a de facto union with a woman named Alceria, and they had 2 children. So de facto union would be like, I think more similar to in the States, like a common law marriage that you see in some states, but it's not recognized in all states. But he later fell in love with a woman named Esperanza, who he planned to marry, but didn't, because he found out that she wasn't a virgin. So then they kind of formed an agreement that they would stay together if she found virgins for him to rape. And for a brief period, they were partners in crime. That led to a lot of the rapes that happened. So then Esperanza would then lure women to his apartment, giving them a sodium seconal sleeping pills, and then Camargo would rape them. He raped 5 girls in total, but did not kill them. The 5th girl reported the crime, and both Esperanza and Camargo were arrested. Camargo was convicted of sexual assault on April 10th of 1964 and sentenced to 3 years, thanking the judge for his leniency and swearing to change his ways. But then a new judge was given the trial, and Camargo was given 8 years and had to serve the full sentence. So then in 1973, he was arrested in Brazil for being undocumented. And then due to a delay in criminal records, there's usually as in the US and other countries, if you're traveling there but you don't have the correct documents, they'll try and see if you're a criminal. But there was a delay in from his reports coming from Colombia to Brazil. So then he was deported and released using the false identity he had been trying to use. So then he returned to Colombia, took up a job as a street vendor where he was selling television monitors in Barranquilla. And then one day when he was passing a school, he was walking past a school, he kidnapped a 9-year-old girl, raped her, and murdered her to prevent a police report. So similar idea to what he was trying to do with raping the girls before, but this time he's like, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to go to jail again, so I'm going to murder her. So then he was arrested on May 3rd, 1974, when he returned to the crime scene to recover the screens that he had left there, so like the TV screens. And he was believed to have killed 80 people in Colombia, but he was only convicted of the one murder and given 25 years. Because there were similar things tying him to other murders, but they couldn't prove anything. So in November 1984, he escapes Gorgona prison, which is known as the Columbia and Alcatraz, in a primitive boat after years of studying the currents. So think of the case of the three men that escaped Alcatraz, or claimed to have escaped Alcatraz and survived. Similar sort of idea. And authorities assumed that he was eaten by sharks, that he had fallen into the water, his boat had not been good enough, and he fell in, was eaten by sharks. So then, because he had survived, he had arrived in Quito, Ecuador, traveled by bus to Guayaquil around December 5th, 1984, and then December 18th, 1984, abducted a 9-year-old girl from Quevedo, and then the next day, suspected to have abducted a 10-year-old girl. So he's moving fast. And then between 1984 and 1986, Camargo committed at least 54 rapes and murders in Guayaquil. And police initially believed the deaths were related to a gang because they didn't think that one man could have committed all of these rapes and murders in 2 years. So then Camargo slept in the streets and lived off money from selling ballpoint pens and occasionally selling clothes or valuables that he would find on the bodies of the people that he murdered and raped. So then in February 26th, 1986, he was arrested shortly after murdering a 9-year-old girl. So like I said, this guy moved fast. And he had spent some time in prison, but he, I guess, couldn't really resist the urge to do what he was doing. So then they approached him at the height of Avenue Los Granados, claiming that he was acting suspicious, which he probably was. Found him carrying a bag of bloody clothes, the actual clitoris of his last victim, he had cut it out, and a copy of Crime and Punishment. So then he was taken into custody, and he gave a false name. The name he gave was Manuel Bulgarin Solis, but then was identified by Maria Alexandra Valles, who was a rape victim that had escaped. At that point, he then admitted to the 72 killings in Ecuador since he had escaped from prison, since he had escaped the Colombian Alcatraz. So then he led authorities to where he had been dumping the bodies that they hadn't recovered. And what they found was many of the bodies were dismembered, so they had to kind of work on piecing them together. So then what was actually noted in some of the crime documents was that he was not showing any feelings of remorse as he was walking police through the crime scenes. And he explained that he had killed a lot of them with a machete, whether that be hacking around the neck, the back of the head. There's a number of ways that he kind of talked about doing. And then he explained also that he wanted to kill virgins because they cried, and that gave him greater satisfaction for raping and killing them. And his MO for this, all he wanted was, he wanted revenge for women's unfaithfulness. He thought that all women were unfaithful, so he wanted to kill as many as he could. And he would typically select lower class girls in search of work, and he would actually approach them and be like, hey, I need a pastor that's out of town. Can you show me how to get there? I have this either large sum of money or a package for them. I just need some guidance to get there. Excuse me. and he would offer a reward for them guiding him to the church. And most people wouldn't suspect, an older guy walking with a younger girl. They would think like, oh, grandpa and grandchild. But if the girls got suspicious, or like, that unnerved feeling and they decide to leave, he wouldn't try and stop them because, you don't want to look too suspicious. But then anybody that stayed with him, he would then rape, strangle, sometimes stab, and then hide the bodies. And he used a local force to hide them. So then he was sentenced in 1989 after his arrest, interrogation, full trial. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, which was the maximum sentence that was eligible in Ecuador at the time. And during his sentence, again, you hear this a lot with many different criminals, that he converted to Christianity and he was a changed man. And while he was in prison, he was actually in prison with Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, who was committing crimes around Columbia, Ecuador, and I believe it was Peru, who killed over 300 people. So their paths actually crossed in prison. And during his sentence, he was actually stabbed on November 13th, 1994 by Giovanni Noguera, who was actually the nephew of one of his victims. Which, if I remember correctly, I did not jot it down. If that killed him or not, I don't remember. Unfortunately, like I said, I did forget to jot that down. But this one, when I was kind of looking into it, again, kind of reminded me of the monster of the Andes. And like I said, come to find out, their paths had crossed. And I wouldn't be shocked if during both of their crime sprees that unintentionally their paths probably crossed, or they were possibly picking victims from same town, same area, and Pedro Lopez probably had some bodies in the area that Camargo probably had too. So it blows my mind that some people that are criminals, their paths cross and they don't even realize it until later on. But if any of you have any questions, comments, suggestions for either new videos on this series or suggestions for a future series, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and have a great day.